And very warm welcome to the first session of Industry Meets Science. And the elevator music is out. This is a live talk series in which we discuss innovations from Germany to meet global challenges as they are presented at this very moment at the World Expo in Dubai. My name is Nico Polosuo, and I'll be hosting these talks from our Covestro virtual studio with a very, very low carbon footprint, I can tell you, together with Forschungszentrum Jülich. Both organizations are presenting exhibits at the German pavilion at the World Expo. So if you're in Dubai, be sure to check them out. So let me get our expert panelists straight in. Here we go. We have Professor Dr. Ulrich Schurr from Forschungszentrum Jülich in sunny Frankfurt. Welcome, Uli. Good to see you.
Hi.
And we have good sound from sunny Frankfurt. And of course, our second guest, Dr. Hannes Dempewolf from Crop Trust. Good to see you, Hannes.
Very glad
we
to
have
be here.
Sound. Fantastic. We have great sound
Very
from
glad to be
Bleiboren, another sunny part of Germany. But before we get rolling, you, dear audience, have an opportunity to join this conversation as well. Just type in your comments, questions, or protests in the chat box, and we'll be able to see them here in the studio and address any questions you may have. We also have Slido open, so just go to slido.com and type in the hashtag biodiv, and I will show it to you right now. Here we go. So you are able to go to slido.com and give your opinion on the topics that we're discussing here today. The first poll is already up. We ask your opinion on what matters in biodiversity to you, and we'll take a look at that in a while. So today's topic, biodiversity, is, of course, the hot news this week as the UN Biodiversity Conference is taking place in the city of Kunming in Western China, where the world leaders are making at least political commitments to preserve nature. But as we'll soon hear from our experts, there is a lot more being done than only to preserve the nature, but also to develop plants and crops in a way that will make this planet inhabitable for flora and fauna for the next generation. So putting food on the plates of our grandchildren. Before we jump into the first questions on biodiversity, let's get to know our guests a little bit. So, Uli, maybe you can start with telling a little bit about you and Forschungszentrum Jülich.
Thanks very much, Nico, for the very nice introduction, and I hope that the sound is okay.
Very good.
Myself, I started actually as a plant ecologist some years ago, over 3 decades ago now. Starting to look about the functionality of plants, how they use water, how they use nutrients, how they are growing. And this led my career through the first 15, 20 years, even in today, trying to understand quantitatively what plants are doing and what the diversity of mechanisms which they have, the diversity of opportunities, also the intelligent solutions which plants use in order to utilize and to live together with nature. So we are very much interested in quantifying this data. That's also the major target of the institute, which I'm heading in Jülich at the moment, where we are doing what we call phenotyping, so quantitative phenotyping on how to learn what plants are doing. This is above ground. This is about photosynthesis, about growth, about yield in crops, but also in non-crop, in natural plants, in plants which are growing out in nature. At the same time, we also go below ground. We do a lot of work on roots, because this is the hidden part of the plant, and this is very important for the interaction between plants and the environment. And there we do a lot of technologies which you know from medical background, which we use in our system. Altogether, we are then utilizing, bringing the plants into the proper sustainability issue, because we can use them on the one hand. We need to have stewardship on the crops which we need in the future, but also maintain the diversity in natural conditions, in natural environments. So that's essentially our task, which we do in the Institute. And back to you, Nico.
Yeah, thanks, Urian. And we could see some of the pictures from the very, very impressive Forschungszentrum Jülich. I mean, you have an amazing campus with amazing technologies. Hannes, a few words about you and the Crop Trust.
Sure. So my name is Hannes Dempe-Wolf, and I'm the Director of External Affairs at an international organization called the Global Crop Diversity Trust. And we're an organization that was set up about 15 years ago to support the conservation and the safeguarding of seeds, of crop seeds, crop diversity in seed banks. This is a globally recognized, a global common good, and it is a shared natural resource we all have as humanity to depend on. And we've been set up as a funding mechanism to make sure that this diversity is available for future generations. And as such, we work a lot on the science policy interface. We support seed banks all around the world to make sure they have the ability to conserve that diversity. And we also work with our partners in Norway on the Svalbard Global Seed Vault, which is the seed bank that maybe most of the viewers are already familiar with.
It's very impressive.
Which, yeah, this is a fantastic place to see and to visit as well. It's a very key part of the global system of seed banking and the preservation of crop diversity. And I'd be happy to speak a little bit more about that later.
Cool. Thanks, Hannes.
Sure.
So let's go right into the first block of topics. The German pavilion. And I will put myself in the picture so you can actually see me. Here I am. So the German pavilion on the Expo 2020, which is kind of confusing for some people because the Expo 2020 is taking place in 21. And that's, of course, because of the delay of the pandemic. So that's why we mentioned the Expo 2020. But the overriding theme of that Expo is sustainability. So my first question is, what role does biodiversity play in this? And how is biodiversity relevant for the Expo 2020? And maybe, Uli, we start with your remarks.
Yeah, let's start by biodiversity and sustainability are sisters and brothers to each other. Because essentially we need to have biodiversity in place to have a sustainable world for our future. At the same time, we threaten as humans the biodiversity which is around us. So we are in the middle of one of the biggest die-out of species which we have on this globe. And this is triggered by our activities as humans. At the same time, we ourselves are very strongly dependent on the biodiversity. We will definitely later on talk about the biodiversity of crops, which is very important for our future food and agriculture and beyond that into other materials. But we also depend a lot on the biodiversity of nature. And this is a kind of brother and sister between sustainability and biodiversity. And that's the reason why we also have our exposition in the Expo, which is bringing plants into the context of sustainability.
Hannes, what's kind of your interpretation of the role of biodiversity in the context of sustainability, as you are kind of protecting our ability to live on this planet for the future generations to come?
Yeah, it's right. I mean, biodiversity, the value of biodiversity is basically immeasurable. There is many aspects of biodiversity that directly contribute to human goods. If we look at biodiversity of the plants we eat, it's culture. Biodiversity means nutrition. Biodiversity means heritage. Biodiversity has an incredible value to pretty much everyone that lives on Earth. And we often just take it for granted. I think that is one of the biggest problems that society is facing. We're not giving it the attention it needs and deserves, and the protection of that biodiversity needs to be much higher on the political agenda of many, if not most, governments in the world. So this is certainly something that we try to advocate for as an organization. And we hope that bold actions will be taken now in the context of the International Biodiversity Framework that you had mentioned earlier, where the meeting was in China this week, but also beyond that. I think we need to get together as a global community to take bold action.
So let's take already here a look at what our audience has reflected so far on what biodiversity means for them. We have health for all, organic agriculture, nature strength, and maybe nature strength is a topic, Uli, that you can also build upon.
Yeah, so definitely. That biodiversity is a very important part of the resilience of ecosystems, the resilience also of producing ecosystems to respond to climate change, to respond to external factors. And if we don't have a diverse system, it will be extremely hard to maintain the resilience of our food production systems. And therefore, the role of the diversity in maintaining our systems is not to be underestimated. Strength means at the same time that we need to learn how biodiversity actually acts and what biodiversity strength actually means. So we have to quantify these activities. We have to know, about the functions, about the structures which are there, which make plants diverse and which make plants make different intelligent solutions in order to make their life and their activity on Earth the basis for what we have in our food basket and beyond.
And we are getting also good commentary now from all around the world. We have Jihad from Bangladesh. We have people joining in from Hamburg. So there is definitely a lot of, I think, worldwide interest from the whole world in what is being done actually right now. And that's kind of my next question. Maybe you can also, Uli, continue with this, as Expo has an entire week on the topic of sustainability. What's specifically now happening in this area? What is being done right now?
So on the one hand, obviously, people are still very much interested in analyzing the diversity as such. So how many species are there? What kind of species are there? What is the structure of species, of different plants which are out there in nature? What is the interaction between species? That's also very much belonging to biodiversity. On the other hand, people are more and more also interested in how to utilize the diversity of crops. So utilize them for what we said before on the food part, but also as a potential opportunity to build a sustainable economy out of it. That's what we call the bioeconomy process, which is also very strongly based in the diversity of crops, the diversity of raw materials, the diversity of possibilities which we can take from nature. And I also saw from the chat that there are some people also asking about the role of diversity in coming up with new structures. So there's also a lot of activities at the moment in learning from plants how the architecture of the future could look like, because plants have been on this globe for much longer time than we have been here, and they came up with many good opportunities to build structures, and we can learn a lot from plants as well. So there's a whole range of, let's try to count species, to learn from species, to analyze their diversity with functional terms, their interaction, as well as utilizing them for future use in other perspectives.
Thanks, Uli. Yes, and I think this is indeed something humans should not forget, that they are also part of nature, and we haven't been on this planet for such a long time. Hannes, you are really protecting crop diversity and protecting the foundation of life with the work that you do. Can you tell a little bit about your perspective into what is Crop Trust doing to go forward?
Sure. So we really deal, or we worry about one particular part or component of biodiversity. Biodiversity is wild plants, wild animals. We focus very much on the biodiversity in our food systems, and specifically the biodiversity of crop plants. And we have many activities that we implement with the support from our donors to make sure that diversity is preserved for the future. One key way of preserving and conserving that diversity is through storing seeds of many different kinds of seeds in seed banks. Often these seeds that are stored in seed banks no longer exist in farmers' fields. They've gone extinct, or they are from many generations ago. These seeds have been bred and have developed over often millennia in different parts of the world, and they are recognized also in international works as a global common good. So seed banks play a key role to protect this global common good. And we as an organization support these seed banks to be able to work on that and make that happen. But all these seed banks would be worth nothing if it wasn't about using that diversity. So we also support different efforts of trying to connect these seed banks with farmers, farming communities. The seeds are being planted out and assessed for different characteristics. Look at different drought tolerance of different wheat varieties, for example. We're also supporting efforts to then utilize that diversity, and for example, in a process called pre-breeding, where material from wild species is crossed into cultivated crop varieties to make them more resilient to climate change, to make them more drought tolerant, to make them more resistant to salinity. All that work takes a lot of time, and this cannot be achieved within 1 or 2 years. Some of our projects run 10 years. Seed banks, we actually, we as an organization are building an endowment fund that enables us to provide long-term support and makes us also quite unique as a funding mechanism. And I think this is an important thing to think about for biodiversity. There's no short-term fixes to safeguard the diversity that nourishes our planet. We need a long-term view here. We need also politicians to understand that it goes beyond a political cycle. The commitment we need from countries to advance these solutions, they definitely needs to go for much longer than usually the political horizon of many of our politicians and elected leaders.
Indeed. So let's actually talk about the future, because obviously we all know that plants and crops will be a central role in counteracting climate change and also make this planet inhabitable with the climate change we're seeing. Of course, we have now the world leaders coming to Glasgow in COP26 and hopefully making strong commitments to keep the temperature down. But if you look at the current numbers, they are not going down. They are actually still on a very high. I think the last graph I saw was 2.7. What the UN, the panel said. So definitely there needs to be work done to make them plants stress resistant. And I think this is a fascinating aspect of what's happening also in Jülich. So Uli, can you explain us what is a stress resistant plant?
Yeah, first, obviously, in contrast to us humans who can disappear into buildings, plants are exposed to the weather, to the environment all the time. So in winter, in summertime, in hot climates, in cold climates, plants are exposed to nature and to the weather conditions and to climate conditions. Therefore, changing climate affects plants. It always sounds very small if you talk about 2.7 degrees, and that's very small. But if you really look into the impact, there's a lot of extremes happening with these in order to deliver this kind of climate change, which we will see in front of us. And we see a lot of changes in extreme weather conditions now across all the globe. So from heat, from very high temperatures to fires, which are connected to them, to flooding. So there's a lot of extremes happening there. And plants have to somehow survive in these conditions. And on the one hand, this is the natural environments which are affected there, where there will be a lot of issues there with the diversity in natural environments, where also plants will die out, others will reconnect to new environments. At the same time, in a plant which we are trying to optimize for future conditions for agriculture and for production, we need to make them more advanced with respect to drought resistance, with respect to nutrient use, with respect to the use of the higher increasing carbon which we will have in the future. And so we have many different options there in our research to learn how plants are actually growing, how plants are producing, and how they are affected by the environment. So what you see there at the moment is a strawberry, which we put into into tomographic systems, so that we can learn how fruits are responding to increased temperatures, and the growth of the fruits is changing to increased temperatures. You can also see transport pathways for carbon, for water in these fruits, because all of them have to be delivered by these nutrients and by the water. So this is our opportunities which we are generating now in our experiments, in our instruments. And we can use this in order to quantify the functional diversity of plants, and we can also use it to optimize crops in a way that we can learn from, for example, the seed banks which the Crop Trust has, in order to identify what is the intelligent solutions which plants have, which you can then utilize for crop production.
It's truly fascinating to see the work of Jülich. And you have interesting projects like phenotyping. I mean, you have been working for years to build on the knowledge of plant health and also plant resistance. So can you also share with us a little bit about the fascinating work that we're seeing in Jülich happening in this area? And I can maybe show a couple of interesting clips from.
So what is one important part of how plants are responding to climate and what makes plant more climate resistant is below ground. And essentially from the plant science perspective, we know very, very little relative to above ground from what's happening below ground. And therefore, on the one hand, we are looking into very details using one picture, using tomographic systems, which you have seen before for fruits. But I think there was also a slide before, a video before, where we can show how plants are growing in the soil, how roots are growing in the soil without taking them out of the plant. Yeah, the one which you see here. So this is for the first time that we really are able to understand how roots are actually working below ground in the habitat which they are working for, which is completely different from above ground. So it's very different from what we know from above ground. The reactions are very different, and we can learn by that how actually plants are behaving in nature. The other pictures, the other slide, video which you just saw, is then going into the analysis of large numbers of genotypes, which we take from seed banks, like the ones which the Crop Trust has, or from breeders, where we can identify crops which are useful, or root systems in this specific case, which are useful to have a plant which is more drought resistant, which takes up more nutrients, which has a better water use efficiency. And these are activities which we need to do with very large numbers of plants. Therefore, we fully automate the systems. So what you see there is a system which we have set up, which is measuring up to 1,000 plants at the same time, with autonomous robots driving around in the greenhouse, unloading them into the measuring systems. And this gives us the opportunity for the first time to really understand in large numbers what diversity of root system actually means. This is also the basis of the expo presentation, which we do in Dubai, where we showcase to the audience what roots are and how roots are working, and how fascinating these roots are in contributing to the fascination of plants altogether.
And indeed, it is fascinating, and I think we can see the German skill set of engineering and bioscience all coming together at the expo. Very, very exciting stuff, I think. Hannes, maybe you can build also a bit upon the question: why do crops have to be stress resistant? I mean, what's happening from your point of view?
Sure, happy to comment on that. So if you think about agriculture and our food systems, it's clear that we need to somehow also transform the food systems that we have today into food systems that are a lot more resilient and that are able to feed more people. But that at a time where we need less inputs into agriculture. We need to reduce pesticide use. We need to reduce fertilizer input because of those other negative environmental effects. So it is really key that we work on exploring what biodiversity can offer. And biodiversity, when scientists look into what traits there are exist out there in nature or in farmers' fields, has a lot to offer. I think that is also very clear. We just need to make sure that we really better understand what it can offer. We need to do lots more research and science to describe the different kinds of biodiversity that are out there, different plant diversity, and to see what kind of characteristics are often hidden in these seeds that maybe haven't been grown for decades or sometimes for centuries. The reason why we need to have these plants to be more climate resistant, more climate resilient, is simple. Climate change affects agricultural production systems everywhere in very different ways. I think climate change really is local. It's a local and regional phenomenon. And it is very important that the greatest array and the greatest diversity of different crops, crop varieties, different genotypes are available to farmers, so they can use them to combat climate change in the situation or in the ecosystem that they're in. And yeah, so the answer here, biodiversity really provides this resilience to farmers, which is so sorely needed in times of climate change.
Yeah. Thanks, Hannes. And we're getting now a big bunch of commentary and also questions from the audience, which is, I think, great. Let me take just one question already, because next time we do want to, of course, talk about what does it really take, what would be kind of the next step to save diversity going forward. There's a question actually from Slido, and thank you for our inventive audience who use all the different channels to ask questions, including Slido, which our panelists are not able to see, but I can just read it because I think it's a great question from Freddie. Freddie is asking, what are the most used indicators and KPIs to measure biodiversity status? Which I think is a really, really relevant question. Any of you guys want to take that one? So, how do you measure biodiversity? Who wants to go first?
I can comment on that, maybe specifically on crop diversity. There are different indicators used. One indicator actually is the number of varieties or seed samples conserved in seed banks all around the world. A very important agency in that regard is the United Nations Food and Agricultural Organization, FAO, that's headquartered in Rome, that collects this data where they're getting countries to submit every few years the number of seeds and seed samples that they're conserving. So that's a really important indicator. But there is, when we're looking at wild biodiversity, there's many different ways of measuring this. Scientists do transects where they measure the number of plants they encounter or animals, for example. There's ecologists all around the world are measuring diversity in different ways. So there's networks set up to measure biodiversity decline. Nowadays, there's also ways to measure biodiversity decline from space. The high resolution satellite imagery that's available now allows us to distinguish different habitat types, heterogeneous environments that support different kinds of biodiversity. So there's a whole array of ways of measuring and monitoring biodiversity.
Thanks, Hannes.
Probably adding on that, there's obviously a lot of opportunities there to measure the functionality of diversity, and not to understand biodiversity just as the number of species, but also the interaction of species. And we learn more and more from the research part that the interaction of the same species or of different species forms a very new diverse kind of diversity, which we have in the microbiome, but also in the microbiome plant interaction. So there's a lot of plant, microbe, animal interactions which is there, which is strongly contributing to the diversity in all the different domains of plants and microbes and animals. So this interaction itself forms a lot of opportunities for biodiversity. This is still very hard to measure, but we learn that this kind of interaction of species is key to understand how biodiversity acts on this globe.
Thanks, Uli. Maybe before we go further into the questions, which are I think great questions, also for Norway. But before we go there, what would be kind of the key developments that you expect to happen or want to happen in the next coming years to save biodiversity in flora and fauna, of course? So what would be kind of your expectations for the next years? Maybe you can comment on that.
Hannes, do you want to start?
Sure, I can start. I mean, in terms of international agenda setting, I think it's clear that we need to really make sure that the 2030 biodiversity framework, for example, that is now being discussed and hopefully concluded soon in China, will really be taken seriously by governments all around the world. It has to be ambitious. And it is also clear that I think the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis that the globe is experiencing are tightly interlinked. And we need to make sure that the biodiversity that they're addressed together. It's also clear that biodiversity has many solutions for the climate crisis in terms of adapting agriculture to climate change, but also other systems. The diversity of life really is a key way of making our globe more climate resilient. And so I think the two frameworks on biodiversity, also the global UN frameworks on biodiversity and on climate change, need to align much better. There needs to be a lot more crosstalk. And in terms of funding commitments by governments, I would wish to see that both of those are addressed at the same time and with hopefully equal weight, because often I think we in the biodiversity community realize that climate change gets all the spotlight and can be quite frustrating since we see at what rapid rate we're losing biodiversity every day all around the world, and there's just not sufficient attention being paid to it.
Thanks, Hannes. Uli?
Yeah, so we need to look fully aligned with what Hannes said so far. I think what we need to go back to the reasons what biodiversity is threatening. So this is our activities as humans. This is expanding our activities into natural environments which are threatened by our activities itself. At the same time, also the question of how we do land use ourselves is something where we can actively demonstrate and increase biodiversity. So the question, how can we probably go from monocultures to more diverse agricultural systems is also a possibility. And don't forget, in the overall biodiversity context, also in the use of biodiversity, the forests. The forests are very huge activities on our global scale, which also require a very good view on biodiversity. And a lot of the diebacks which we see at the moment in many areas of, for example, in Europe, has to do with a endangered small narrowing of biodiversity in the past, which then has after decades responses in how the systems behave when they are moving out of the normal which they had before.
Indeed, and also in Finland, where we grow a lot of forests, we have been also going more and more into the mixed forest to kind of increase that resilience to viruses and other forest diseases to make it more resilient for the upcoming climate change. But I think also, Hannes, your point about climate change and biodiversity has to be tackled together. Otherwise, it does not look good for either of those, and of course, ultimately for the humans. I think there are great questions on the chat, and feel free to pick some that you guys feel are relevant. Just let me take one, which I think is interesting. I'll put it on screen from G Bin. Thank you. How proof is the seed bag against the ever-growing newer strains of virus? So this is I think interesting. How do you kind of protect the plants from what do you do with the seeds to make sure that they kind of remain healthy in the seed banks? Maybe that's a more general question. Yeah, Hannes, you want to take that?
Sure. So plant health is a really, really important component of the operation of any seed bank. It's key to make sure that high quality seed is being provided by these seed banks that's not contaminated in any way. So there's usually rigorous health testing standards implemented at the point of that seeds enters the seed bank, but also where it leaves and is being distributed. So that's a really key and important point because you don't want to distribute, unwantedly diseases that may be contaminating some seeds. And there are some seed banks that have, in fact, materials that are contaminated that they need to treat to make sure that they can distribute material that's virus-free. And so that has been taken very seriously.
Thank you. And I hope that answered your question. Jibin, thank you very much for that question. There are other ones which I think are really interesting. Please, Uli or Hannes, if you have some which you regard as something you want to take up on, go ahead.
Yeah, probably the one from Shadid Chowri, which I can see there at the moment. I think that's on the question of how we use biodiversity to complement increased agri-production, ever increasing, but what you see the need for food increasing population. I think that's a very interesting one because we also see that a lot of the food production system is narrowing in itself. So we have a lot of the 75% of the calories which we produce on this globe are just coming from 3 to 4 different species. At the same time, these species have a very narrow origin of where they come from. While at the same time, the many different crops which we have in different habitats globally might provide a lot of opportunities beyond the species which we use at the moment. So there is a lot of opportunity there, which if we utilize nature, which has been adapted to certain habitats, certain regions already. And that also links back to what I think was mentioned before as well. Food is not just quantity. Food is also quality. Food is also a lot of culture. And we should maintain not only should maintain the cultural diversity which we have also based on the crop production which we have. So it's not mobilizing everything into one different kind of diet which we have, but rather to utilize the opportunities which are there from different agricultural productions which are available globally.
Thanks, Hannes. Thanks, Uli. Very good. I have, I think, interesting questions from the audience. Hannes, is there something you want to specifically pick up, or?
I do actually, but just to add one quick comment to Uli, what Uli just said. I think one way that's really interesting and good to think about biodiversity is biodiversity as innovation, and I think that also fits very well the topic of the German Pavilion. It is. It's a source of innovation. It's all around us, but we often are not very good at discovering that kind of innovation. And I think it's in the case of crop diversity, innovation sometimes means going back to old stuff. But seeds that have been selected by farmers for millennia may have the solution for some of the challenges we're facing today or in the future. And I think it's quite a nice way to think about biodiversity contributing to innovation in that way. One comment I saw in the chat here was around seed banks being a protection to start again human species anew if any possible use of catastrophic events happens. And I think that we often in the seed bank community, that is something that we often hear, and of course these kind of worst case scenarios are kind of interesting to think about. But I think what's important to understand is that we're in a crisis right now. We are already losing agricultural production all around the world due to the effects of climate change. We don't need a global catastrophe to need seed diversity. We need seed diversity is being used at the moment. But I think we need globally a lot more attention and systematic efforts to really explore what biodiversity has to give us and to make sure that the biodiversity that remains is safeguarded in a way that it is available for the future. So that's just a comment I had on one of the comments in the chat I noticed.
I could probably just continue there with commenting on Babak's comment. It's not really a question, but rather comment. The collection and conservation of natural biodiversity, right, in gene banks cannot make any change unless we can use the diversity in our breeding programs and pre-breeding programs to transfer resilience and traits of interest to improved susceptible varieties. Fully agree with that, and it's good to have that question. And we work together with the Crop Trust since some years. We discuss how we can actually make this analysis of, on the one hand, seeds, but on the other hand, also the traits which are somehow in these seeds which are in seed banks. And one of the videos which you might have a look at, Nico, is the phenoseeder which we built some years ago now, which allows us to phenotype seeds. And this is an automated, robotized system which gives an opportunity to as a first step, learn what kind of diversity is there in seeds. This is more on the next level when we are growing seeds in high diversity, but we can also directly measure seed quantities, seed structures. We actually have now also a new system where we can actually look into the seeds with a CT, so that we have single seed CT also connected to a robot which delivers that. So this gives us the opportunity to first quantify the diversity which is actually in seed banks, and then obviously we have to use all the opportunities of modern genetics and modern molecular biology, modern bioinformatics to link the information. Right, that's the one which is just measuring seeds. All the opportunities which are there from the seed banks and how to bring them to the breeder. So this is a very interdisciplinary approach which we have to take there in order to valorize the great opportunity which is located in seed banks.
Thanks, Uli, and thanks, Babak, who also commented, which is great. There's so much potential in using that new technology and high tech to really get to the bottom of creating stress-resistant plants. So it's and thank you guys for doing your work, because I think this is really necessary, not for all of us. Any other topics that you find you want to address before we close down for today's broadcast?
I think there's a great additional aspect in there where probably all of us can also comment that from Shahid on the social aspects of biodiversity. Social aspects, we should not just leave it to the politicians, not just leave it to the scientific experts, not just leave it to the professionals in biodiversity. It's also a task for all of us as humans to protect biodiversity. And there are many opportunities to do that. We are all customers buying stuff each day. That's an opportunity where we can also affect biodiversity in crops. If we buy diverse, we can go to our farmers and understand what farmers are actually doing. I think there's a lot of opportunity and need there for consumers to better understand what farmers are doing. They are not by intent violating biodiversity. There's a lot of pressure into them at the moment to violate biodiversity issues. But at the same time, it's not in their intent as farmers themselves to violate biodiversity, because essentially this biodiversity helps farmers, if it's done properly, in order to produce and to generate yield. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there where also the people in general, the audience needs to understand what biodiversity is about. And it's really for us to ourselves to be in there and part of the stewardship of biodiversity on this globe altogether.
Cool.
Yeah, maybe just to add here real quick, if I may, we work a lot in the key focus for our organization is the developing world, and especially in the developing world, what you can see that is that indigenous communities and small-scale farmers have an immense knowledge on biodiversity and how to use that biodiversity. I think there's a lot we can learn from. And I think we also need to respect those indigenous communities and these small-scale farmers in the way they have been safeguarding that biodiversity over millennia. And that is an invaluable contribution they have been making and are continuing to make to the survival of our planet. That's, I think, also an aspect that is often not pronounced enough and highlighted enough in these discussions.
I think that's great, Hannes. I mean, it's great that you kind of bring this out because indeed, there is a lot of knowledge that also old knowledge that we are just not aware of and experience. And just by tapping into that, we can, learn from the past. And it's great also to know that there is somebody protecting these seeds if something should go wrong. It's really dramatic to see how so much extinction has happened and nobody cared. And now people care more. So I think that's a very optimistic view. So we have time for one more question before we have to close down our broadcast from Dubai and Frankfurt and Pittsburgh. Is there some topic that you want to pick out from the stream of chats? And thank you so much for bringing that. I think there are many, but I let you guys as experts pick them out.
Probably for me, a final one, just following up on what we just discussed on the society and what is needed in order to protect biodiversity. We need to really mobilize on as many channels as possible the humankind to protect biodiversity. And there are many opportunities and many needs there. There are NGOs which need to be activated. There are activation on the science side, the political side, industry, agriculture, farming, but also the downstream industries need to be interested in really developing sustainable systems, and that's sustainable systems are biodiverse systems. And just as a kind of final comment from my side, you probably see the poster on the screen here. We are just opening today together with here in Frankfurt in a museum of arts, a collaboration and an exhibition on the intelligence of plants, where we bring together artists and science to develop the common understanding for the society what plants and how intelligent plants are. This is a great opportunity also to reach completely different audience than we have before. So be open to the diversity also in thinking of people to protect biodiversity for us as mankind altogether.
Thanks, Uli. And sometimes your work looks like art anyway. I think phenotyping is art. Hannes, any last comments from your side?
Yeah, I think I just think it's I've mentioned this earlier, but also what sort of Uli alluded to, this societal aspect and the value of biodiversity in culture. I think is not to be underestimated. What we also need to always think about is that none of us own biodiversity as such. Biodiversity is something that we need to protect. We have a responsibility to protect. But really, it is something that's there for everyone to enjoy. And we as a global community, no matter where we live, should come together to protect this as a priority and put that protection of biodiversity above national interests, which all too often we see is not the case. So I think it would also be an appeal that we don't just enjoy biodiversity, we take our responsibilities seriously for having to protect it and implement policies that are working in that support.
Thanks, Hannes. And thanks, Uli. And thanks for our amazing audience. We can see that there is a lot of passion and a lot of interest around this topic. And that's, I think, a very, very positive sign, because we own the nature, we are the nature, and only together we can protect it and make it flourish. And as Hannes, I think you also nicely said, it needs the commitment from really everybody, governments, but mostly actually people, because people make the choices in the end. So thank you so much for joining this broadcast. It has been amazing to talk with our friends from Blaubeuren and Frankfurt, from the Crop Trust and Forschungszentrum Jülich. It's tough to talk German and English in the same sentence for a Finnish guy, I can tell you. We will continue to share and explore the stories from the German pavilion next week, October 21st, that's a Thursday, when we'll dive into the future cities topic, another component of the German pavilion, and the world of carbon capture and utilization, also a very exciting aspect and topic. So until then, thank you very much for participating. Thank you, Uli. Thank you, Hannes. And thank you, our wonderful audience. Stay healthy and bye-bye.
Thank you, and thanks for having us. Bye.
Thanks very much.